Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you listened to my story. Please give me a follow and like the video if you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment and provide feedback so I can improve the sound quality. Yes, we invite you to listen to part 7 of the series. Chapter 56, Streak of Red. Speed changed a lot of things when applied differently to mechs. A heavy mech that weighed many tons treated speed like rare animals. Even if their engines doubled in size, the effective increase in speed only amounted to just a dozen%. Most heavy mechs didn't bother with increasing their speed. On the other hand, a light mech normally lived for speed. Designers often clenched their teeth when they traded off little bits of speed for additional weapons and armor. They often considered this exercise the most painful one imagined, akin to pulling out one's teeth. VES felt as if his entire jaw ached as he firmly cut off portions that made the octagon strong in the first place. He carefully removed bits of armor here and there while thinning other portions. By the time 5 days had passed, VES looked bloodshot at a mech that appeared about 30% thinner than usual. I can't do this anymore. I've practically skinned this octagon to the bone. I can hardly call it a medium mech now. The new variant's armor took a substantial hit. Though it gained a generous boost in speed and agility in return, it ceased to be a frontline unit. It lacked both the endurance and armor to compete against regular frontline mechs. The only thing about the armor scheme he left adopted from the Mist Prowler was incorporating a bit of flexi-plate around the joints and fittings. The flexible armor weighed relatively little, and the joints only required a handful of armor to cover up against most incidental damage. While it wouldn't survive a direct blast, it was better than nothing. Now, for the boosters. As VES wanted his light mech hunter to close the distance to their prey in one giant dash, he opted to utilize 6 boosters instead of less. Though it consumed a lot of fuel, all but the lightest armed mechs were in the variant's grasp. The exact placement of the boosters was kind of tricky. As mechs emulated the human running form, they varied the alignment of their backs when doing different activities. While keeping the back upright was the most efficient way to move in simple runs, most mechs often had to move under enemy fire. The very human tendency to bend forward and keep your head down was a very natural reaction, but one that also stood in the way of good booster management. Though the nozzles came with a limited range of movement, they could only do so much work. What VES intended to do was to embed his 6 boosters in a simple rectangular pattern onto the back. While he could have used more complicated shapes such as a pentagon with a middle booster or a hexagon without one, such designs fared poorly when damaged. He put the placement of the boosters around the center of gravity, with a slight downward shift. This subtle effect caused the mech to tilt a little upwards when the boosters burned at full force. VES aimed to achieve such an effect so that the mech could traverse forwards with lighter footsteps, making it easier to go over uneven terrain. If he went the opposite direction and allowed the boosters to push the mech downwards, then they gave it a much better grip. This let the mech take sharper turns at the cost of a reduced speed and increased stresses on the frame. While better control over the direction is nice, it's not worth it if my mech loses too much speed. Since the priority is to close the distance from point A to point B as fast as possible, then it's better to go for straight-line acceleration. In essence, VES turned his variant into a rocket. One that was really good for flying in a somewhat straight line and nothing else. He figured the mech should have enough grip to make last-second turns in case its target abruptly dodged. Once he finished working on the boosters, he took a step back and looked at his light mech killer. While it should largely function as envisioned, VES thought it lacked a certain punch. The octagon's default spear looks kind of skinny. The spear was meant for opportunistic stabbings when the octagon moved wildly from side to side. In order to facilitate penetration, the shape of the spear was as thick and pointy as possible. Overall, it looked like an oversized toothpick. Such a slim design did not fit with his current design. If his mech engaged its boosters and caught up with a light mech, the incredible momentum behind its spear thrust could easily lose control over its weapon by over-penetrating the opening blow. Not only would the spear sink in too deep, the damage was also limited as most of the damage was concentrated in a small area instead of being spread out from the point of impact. Letting the spear keep its current shape wasted a perfectly good opportunity to deal a hammering blow. He edited the spear's design to make the shaft sturdier and the spear point a little broader. Now that VES applied these quick changes, the spear was able to transfer kinetic energy better at the moment of impact. The variant design now neared its completion. Still, VES thought it lacked a certain amount of presence. Right now, it merely looked like an overly slimmed-down medium mech. He did not want to give his variant a wimpy appearance. Aesthetics mattered. Plenty of mechs with mediocre specifications got sold every day due to looking good. I forgot to include the festive cloud generator as well. VES really liked the effect of the cloud generator. Not only did it add a little flair, it also acted as a badge for his home planet. Other pilots from Cloudy Curtain should instantly recognize what he had done, and were hopefully more inclined to buy his virtual mechs as a result. In his view, he had two choices to place his cloud generator. The most distinct features of his variant was its boosters and its spear. If I place the cloud generator on the back, it'd be kind of boring. It also draws needless attention to the rear. The last thing I want to do is place a psychological suggestion that enemies should focus on attacking its back. Instead, he turned to the rather interesting challenge of incorporating the cloud generator in a spear. VES made some estimates and found that it was possible if he chose the slimmest cloud generator. He could incorporate the main generator in the handle of the spear without affecting the spear's front integrity. However, the spear wouldn't look very cool if the butt end of the spear released vapor. So VES edited the spear's design again and led a small and narrow line from the back of the spear all the way to the front. The integrity of the spear wasn't affected too much if the tunnel was carved in the middle of the shaft. He added a number of small exhausts right behind the spearhead. Inspired by the unique look of a certain style of ancient spears, VES dyed the vapor in a bright red color. Backdropped by the black spear and silver chrome mech, the red should make for a powerful contrast when the machine charged forward. Kind of like a knight, though a poorly armored one at that. When VES inputted his mech in a couple of simulation, he found himself impressed. The mere addition of that streak of red dramatically enhanced the presence of the mech. When the machine charged forward with its boosters employed to their maximum, the mech resembled an unstoppable meteor. It was a much more flattering look than the unstable rocket-like appearance the action previously resembled. In order to enhance this illusion, VES coated the mech's frame with a couple of colorful red streaks. The additional touch also distinguished his new variant from the base model, so people wouldn't confuse it with a regular octagon. I think that's it. Well, system, what do you think? Design evaluation, Speed Demon. Variant name, 225CS Speed Demon. Weight classification, Extreme Medium Light. Recommended role, Anti-Light Mech Armor, D+. Endurance, C-. Flexibility, A-. Firepower, E-. Integrity, C-. Deviance, 30%. Performance improvement, 7%. Cost efficiency, -14%. Overall evaluation, the Speed Demon provides an alternative piloting style that does not fully live up to its concept. Too much performance has been sacrificed in order to achieve the desired speed and impact damage. You have received 5 design points for completing an original design. Shit. The Speed Demon, as he named it, did not perform as well as he envisioned. While it differed drastically from the base model, it did not offer a superior performance if comparing their respective performances in the battlefield. In other words, the Speed Demon was different, not better. Having come off from designing the Mist Prowler with a small but clear improvement in performance, VES thought he let himself down. I shaved off too much armor. In hindsight, I should have picked a more appropriate armor system that performs better when applied thinly. VES wanted to avoid spending more of his dwindling credits than he already had, so he declined to purchase yet another system. The boosters were bad enough. If he kept spending his credits like a garden hose, he'd quickly end up broke to the point where he needed to draw some cash from his piggy bank to make up for the shortfall. Even the X-Factor is a little weaker than in my last mech. He already felt as if this aspect wasn't as good as his last one. VES clearly enjoyed designing the formidable and unique-looking Mist Prowler. The challenges he faced in forming and optimizing its modular armor scheme were fulfilling. In comparison, the Speed Demon was more of an exercise in frustration. He gnawed his teeth many times trying to find a way to shed weight without paying too much for the loss. The negative emotions must have influenced the intent he put into his design. All in all, VES learned a lesson with his latest design. He shouldn't bite off more than he could chew if he wanted to earn lots of DP. Still, I learned quite a bit from this experience. I've gained a much better appreciation of the difficulties involved in forcibly increasing the speed of a mech. Despite the disappointing performance of the mech, it worked well enough to be put on the virtual market. Like all his designs, VES priced the Speed Demon as low as possible without making a loss. As he wanted to maximize his DP gains, he gave up on making any credits from the sales of his mechs in Iron Spirit. My second commission should be coming soon. I wonder how long Marcella plans to wait before passing me another order. He could only be patient and trust his broker to pull through with her search for clients. So far, from what he heard, the Phoenix Cry acquitted itself well in its first real combat operation. At the very least, Captain Carruthers hadn't called back and hollered his ears off. The mech was technically sound. A week had passed during the time VES designed the Speed Demon. That was enough time for VES to receive his scheduled security upgrades. A number of heavily armed shuttles bearing the markings of Sanyal Ablin Security Services arrived from Freslin to his workshop. Technicians, security experts, and many loading bots debarked from the vehicles and started unloading their gear. Robin greeted VES at his doorstep. Your Cyber Robo package has arrived. We'll be taking around a day to set it all up. Do we have permission to scan your workshop and dive into your software? If you wish to keep some files confidential, I can give you time to make backups. I've already done so. Feel free to take apart my computers. Just put them back together when you're done. In truth, VES kept pretty much all of his sensitive design files in his Mech Designer system. While he was pretty much putting all of his eggs in one basket, at least he had full control over it at all times. Under the watchful eye of VES, the experts of the SAS went to work with care. While the loader bots started to place sensors, electric fencing, and other nifty gadgets, the human personnel scoured the workshop for any nefarious devices. Our team reports nothing untoward has been detected so far, Mr. Larkinson. That lifted a weight off his back. That's reassuring. He was not in the clear yet. When the experts finished scanning the rooms and hallways, they started to inspect his gear. His computer terminal where he did most of his virtual work was taken apart. The computer expert carefully scanned each and every chip, cable, and even the screws. Then he put it back together and started the terminal up. Using his own specialized software, Heman carefully dug deep within the terminal's data. I've detected a couple of dormant vulnerabilities, the expert said. I've taken care of them all. VES wasn't too worried about that. He only used his terminal to perform research and access Iron Spirit's market interface. Any hacker who got into his computer system could only read his browsing history. As for using his account to log into Iron Spirit, the game didn't allow anyone to log in without a second process of verification, such as a neural pattern scan. VES left the computer nerd to his work and instead visited the main work hall. Most of the security experts were present here. With the help of their own disassembly bots, they took the 3D printer and assembler apart. They tediously went over each part and noted any abnormalities. So far, the only deviations from the standard that they found could be chalked to wear and tear. A pair of other computer experts scoured the software of the systems for any irregularities. Fortunately, they found nothing serious. The only problems they found were non-standard repairs for broken parts and a few odd software tweaks that raised performance at the risk of more malfunctions. These modifications were left from the previous owner of the machines. As they didn't intentionally sabotage the complex machines, VES opted to keep them as they were. He only planned to keep them for a decade at most. Chapter 57, Ominous Warnings. As Miss Robin from the SAS supervised the work, she also approached VES for a talk. As a mech designer, when do you think we will switch to the next generation? Taken aback by the question, VES needed a moment to think through his answer. It won't happen too soon. We can milk our current generation for at least 10 years. We mech designers don't like to see the value of our work plummet before we extracted as much value out of it as possible. I'm sure the big manufacturers are colluding to keep this generation alive as long as possible. The security consultant nodded. That fits with our internal assessment. However, the new technologies employed by the advanced states have already leaked out a little bit. We do not believe the mech industry can stand in the way to progress very long. Why are you asking about this? Are you planning to upgrade your security hardware? For sure, and more besides that. You may not have heard about this seeing as you're young, but the mech and security markets are at their busiest just before the generational switch. That sounded strange to VES. Why is that so? The new mechs aren't out yet. Why waste their money on goodies that will just turn last gen a few years later? A smirk appeared on Robin's narrow face. Oh, they aren't investing in new equipment, they are draining their existing stock as they wage wars and engage in high-risk ventures. Consider this. When was the last time the Vija Kingdom and the Bright Republic went to war? That was about 30 years ago. Right when? Oh. 30 years ago was roughly a decade before the switch to the current generation. The war between both nations were by all accounts brutal, though both sides tried to minimize battles near large population centers. Mech pilots, support troops and logistical personnel suffered the most casualties in that war. The worst thing about the war was that it ended inconclusively, just like all the previous wars between the two local rivals. A few planets changed hands and a couple of small cities got wiped off the map. The Bright Republic got a little worse off than the Vija Kingdom, but that didn't prevent the Republic from touting that they held the line against the foreign aggressors. As a friend in the industry, I advise you to keep your eyes peeled. The impending conflict might not escalate into a war between states, but you will see plenty of provocations and reprisals in the news. I'm sure the SAS will be exceptionally busy during the coming times, and so will you. If it comes to it, you might find yourself drafted. That sounded like his worst nightmare. If VES got pulled away from his workshop, he could not generate any revenue or earn DP. While there were several provisions built into his contracts that allowed him to pause some aspects if the draft came for him, it still didn't leave him with much choice. If he came back years later with no money to invest in new equipment, he'd be stuck with obsolete assets that generated almost no value. Luckily, I've been awarded with a privileged status. The government shouldn't treat me too poorly. Robin looked at him with a skeptical eye. Don't think you can get a free pass with your award. On the contrary, the bureaucrats value privileged citizens even more. They get assigned to the highest priority missions, which can be good or bad for you. The pay and conditions you receive are generous, but the risks of getting caught under fire is very likely. VES already gulped at those words. He wasn't cut out to fight. He had given up his dream of becoming a mech pilot long ago and had fully adjusted to a civilian mentality. Give him a gun and he'd be liable to shoot off his foot. He also realized he was out of touch with the core Larkinson family. He'd bet Melinda and the other serving pilots in the family already knew about this. Perhaps Melinda assumed he knew as well. The people of Sunyalablin packed up their gear when they finished beefing up the security. VES eagerly said goodbye to Robin and her people as they boarded their much emptier shuttles and flew back to Freslin. Though the people hadn't found anything egregiously wrong, it might happen anytime in the future once he built up a name. Speaking of which, when will Marcella deliver the next order? In the weeks since he sold his first Mark Antony, he came to enjoy spending money. He wished the ex-pilot turned saleswoman would work a little faster in managing his sales. He didn't agree to give her a 20% commission for nothing. Does she even want the money? He declined to pick up his comm and call her personally. It indicated a lack of trust and an abundance of insecurity on his part. He'd wait another week. What should I do now? His disappointing result from his last design put him in a bad mood. As VES realized the importance of maintaining a positive outlook when designing a mech, he needed to spend some time doing something else in order to regain his cheer. A mech designer is much like an artist in that aspect. He figured as he looked over Lucky as the cat still slept like a log. If we're not in the mood, we'll always be creating a work that misses the mark. Everyone considered mech design to be an intricate craft. Though the big transgalactic corporations turned the industry into a mass market, small independent designers still had a chance to compete with the help of the Mech Trade Association. Speaking of the MTA, I never really looked into them when I started my business. Perhaps they have some advice for me and my situation. As VES had an abundance of free time, he skipped the terminal and instead hailed a aircab to Orinoco, the capital of Cloudy Curtain. The trip lasted a couple of hours due to the time it took to travel from one side of the planet to the other side. If VES was in a hurry, he could pay for a trip on an entry shuttle, but the expense wasn't worth it if it only shaved off an hour of travel time. Having visited the MTA before during his first certification, a receptionist greeted him without fanfare. "Mr. Larkinson, how may I help you? I've been in the business a few months but I'm not entirely familiar with the norms and regulations surrounding mech design and production." Could you have someone guide me with the information that would be most useful to a beginner like me? The receptionist pursed her lips. That is a highly unusual request for our branch. The advisors in Bentheim are much more equipped to address your needs. Hang on for a moment, I'll check with my manager. After a short wait, the receptionist came back. The administrative director would like to meet you in his office. He expressed some interest in Cloudy Curtain's first mech producer. VES agreed to the request. He figured talking with someone who could call himself a director knew a thing or two about the traditions of the mech industry. Am I meeting with Ryan Baldwin again? Ah, no. Mr. Baldwin is the officer in charge of combat operations. He's the military leader of our branch. Got it. Led by the receptionist, he entered the lift and rode it to the top of the office building. He exited to a clean and elegant-looking hall. The enormous room took up the entire top floor, and was replete with windows and artwork. Every single nuance of design spoke of privilege and superiority. Don't mind the decor. An elderly voice came from the luxurious chair at the other end of the giant office. It sometimes pays to impress the locals, but I'm sure I don't need to awe you with our association's prestige. As VES was not entirely a country bumpkin, he quickly shrugged off the oppressive atmosphere. He had seen much worse when he studied in Rittersberg. The capital planet of the Republic reeked of elitism. Compared to his experiences there, the MTA director's office clearly appeared sober and tasteful. VES took a seat in the only available chair. He felt like a little schoolboy summoned in front of the principal for a lecturing. So you are the young man who bravely started a mech business in Cloudy Curtain. Curious. Can I ask you why you founded your business here rather than in a more developed planet? He took deep breath and spoke evenly. The tax incentives are very attractive here. This is my home, and I'm familiar with the planet. Bentheim is a strange place that I've only stepped foot in once, so I was not inclined to join their crowded mech market. Besides, shipping between the two planets is fast and doesn't cost too much. I'm rather surprised more businesses haven't taken advantage of the friendly business climate here. It is because Cloudy Curtain is naked and vulnerable. The administrator spoke as he finally turned around to face VES. His white-bearded visage gave the distinguished man an authoritative air. From his accent and appearance, he clearly came from a more advanced human state. The best security this dirtball of a planet can offer is a bunch of criminal mercenaries who are more proficient in drinking themselves to stupor than fending off a serious pirate attack. The director had a point. As the public port of the Republic, the Mech Corps regarded its security very highly. His cousin Melinda was just one in many thousands in the Planetary Guard. No troublemaker could kick up a storm and get away with it for long. As for Cloudy Curtain, perhaps a rogue mercenary gang could easily wipe out Freslin and have plenty of time to escape before the authorities got their asses in gear. I haven't thought about that, sir. VES plainly admitted, though he sounded a touch defiant. I'm not moving my business, though. My mech boutique is tiny. It's not worth robbing. The older man smiled at him. You have a backbone at least. That is good. Those who bend too easily in adversity do not make good entrepreneurs. Since you are worth my time, you can call me Justin Chandler. Leave out director or sir. Yes, Mr. Chandler. VES replied politely. He relished the chance to question a senior official of the MTA. I have a couple of questions. Do you mind if I can ask them? Ask away. First, do you know any way of obtaining a production license cheaper than what's available on the open market? Chandler shook his head. There are ways, but none that apply to you. Through shortcuts, connections, and improper methods, many mech designers have gotten their hands on these licenses. I believe that you yourself have received a couple of old production licenses as grants. Once or twice is okay. But don't base your business model around these easy licenses. A successful designer must stand on their own feet and create a completely original design to achieve a lasting presence in the market. The old man made sense, VES thought. But what about component production licenses? They still cost hundreds of millions of credits. Is that much? I don't think so. I don't have insight in your accounting, but I am rather sure that this sum won't be a problem for you to acquire. You need to put in the hard work and keep up at it diligently. If you are a good designer, your earnings will reflect that. If you are at a point where you are constantly worrying about being able to pay for licenses and upgrades, then you are just not good enough. The advice sounded harsh, but true. If VES was any random mech designer, he might have been cowed. With the assurance of the system, VES knew he'd outgrow his novice mech designer status any day. He was very confident of his future. You're right. I shouldn't worry too much about it. I've only achieved one mech sale so far, but I expect that my sales will pick up. Perhaps I will make a couple of other variants that will enhance my earnings. As long as you are not at the end of your rope, you have many opportunities to achieve success. VES turned to his next question. All of my resources come from the MTA's internal market. I'm paying out of my nose for the raw materials required to produce a mech. I've been wondering if you can help me connect with a few suppliers to reduce my expenses. You will not attract any fixed suppliers at your scale. Chandler shook his head again. Unless you have formidable backing or an excellent referral, do not dream of negotiating better terms. The upstream industries think and operate on a scale unimaginable by your standards. A one-man startup like yours does not even qualify a second's worth of attention of their sales department. So it's impossible for me to get more favorable prices anywhere. That is not true. You can look closer and look at the local industries in Cloudy Curtain and the surrounding Star provinces. This region is poor and undeveloped, which means that most of the local mining and processing is done by small and medium enterprises, family businesses, and cooperatives. The relative negotiating power between the two of you will be a lot less skewed. That could work out, though I won't be able to source the more exotic resources from local suppliers. I can send you a list of references to approach some of these suppliers. I'm sure my name will open some doors for you. The favor Director Chandler bestowed to him was substantial. VES was deeply appreciative of the gesture. Thank you, Mr. Chandler. That is something I've always racked my brains about. Receiving your reference helps me avoid a lot of pitfalls. The two discussed a lot of other, minor topics. VES and Chandler went over issues such as the production of munitions, bad idea, the cost of insurance, way too much, what to do when getting drafted, demand postponement of debt and any other time-sensitive issues, and more. The conversation was productive. While Chandler rarely gave out an answer that satisfied VES, the fog in front of his mech designer career had parted a little. He no longer became mystified when faced with certain questions. At the end of the meeting, Chandler sent a couple of useful books to his mail. It pays to read up on the relevant laws. Always remember that mech designers invent killing machines, not glamorous toys. Although it does not look like it, we of the MTA take a very dim view to any mishandling of dangerous weapons. VES gulped at that last warning. Understood. I will be sure to treat my physical products seriously. Oh, I'm not worried about you. Instead, I'd keep a closer eye on your friends and associates if I were you. Whether the advice was of any use in the future or not, VES didn't know. He said goodbye to the insightful director and slowly left the opulent office. The director kept his sagely eyes on the young designer as he entered the lift and rode it back to the ground floor. Chapter 58, Profligate. Profligate. Lucky finally woke up the day after VES visited the MTA. The cat appeared to slink in a satisfying manner, as if he ate the biggest fish in the universe. VES gave his pet the stink eye. So, you got anything to say? Meow. The cat acted cute and brushed its smooth body against his legs. VES let go of his irritation and just picked up the cat and hugged him in his arms. It was easy to forgive the loss as he never really owned the strange material in the box to start with. He suspected the advanced alloy may have been meant for Lucky in the first place. Do you feel the need to go to the litter box? Strangely enough, even after a couple of hours the cat never visited the toilet or his backyard. VES picked up his cat again and inspected his body closely. Lucky still looked and weighed the same. He started to doubt whether anything really changed. Did the cat just eat a bunch of priceless alloys because it tasted good? He fed Lucky his usual meal of minerals and let it go out and play. VES still had work to do. His harvest from the MTA mainly consisted of directions. He did not gain much knowledge, but he did gain avenues for further study, as well as a couple of books. He went over the 3 electronic books sent to his mail account. The 3 books all consisted of introductions to the laws concerning the production and use of mechs. The books appeared to be prepared by the MTA to give out to young mech pilots and mech designers, so the level of jargon and the depth of topics remained fairly shallow. It was the perfect set of books for VES to familiarize himself with the laws around mechs beyond the brief lessons he received from his days in college. The first book revolved around the most important laws that govern the use of mechs in human space. It detailed the history just after the invention of mechs about 400 years ago, and explained how human space grew more chaotic with this advancement in warfare. The main point this chapter conveyed was that mechs made war easier. The ability of all human states to wage war increased substantially because mechs packed more firepower and mobility while requiring relatively less maintenance than other unit types such as planes, tanks, and infantry. It gave smaller nations a chance to stir up trouble against their larger neighbors, but it also allowed these behemoths to crush rebels thoroughly by flattening everything in their way with ease. War between the human states intensified, with conflicts happening up to 5 times more than before the invention of mechs. It led to a lot of suffering among the poor. Something needed to be changed. Naturally, as the book was published by the MTA, it predictably presented it as the savior of mankind. With hardly any explanation of how it came about, the MTA splashed onto the scene with powerful mechs and warships and suppressed the most gruesome conflicts with an even bloodier fist. Quickly, all the smaller human states got cowed while the larger nations negotiated treaties. The MTA firmly established itself as the arbiter of human conflict. The rest of the book introduced all the major laws the MTA enforced with vigor. From the prohibition on the use of starships in internal human conflict, to the abolishment of nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons, pretty much all weapons capable of inflicting mass harm were limited to external defense against aliens. The only thing that really remained untouched were mechs. VES found it peculiar why the MTA focused so much on promoting mechs and the technology behind it. They not only encouraged its use in wars, they also supported the industry behind it with licensing laws and certification services. The MTA single-handedly changed human civilization to worship mechs. For what? He asked, and was pretty sure he was not alone in asking this question. Spaceships remained the kings of power projection. What use was dominating the surface of a planet when even a middle-sized ship could bombard the hard-won location from above? The warships and the spacers serving on them were the real heroes of humanity. These invisible but vital servicemen defended the borders of human space against alien aggression every day. Yet hardly any day went past in the news without the mention of this mech or that mech. Many mech pilots stood out from the crowd and even became stars. As for warships, well, VES could not recall a single name of a person who served on a spaceship. Even the other Larkinsons who all prided themselves as a martial family never got involved in the Navy. He eventually shrugged as he finished the book. I'm sure there's a story behind it all. The second book surprisingly dealt with the mech laws in the Greater Terran United Confederation. As a first-rate human superstate, it wielded a disproportionate amount of military power. On paper, it looked like an invincible giant that could treat all outside attacks as pinpricks. Reality proved many times that they often got the short end of the stick when battling against their eternal rivals. The new Robarth Empire smashed the Confederation's nose time and time again. The simplest explanations to this occurrence always emphasized the Empire's centralization versus the Confederation's feudal-like power structure. The real answers involved more than merely governance. As the oldest human alliance, the Confederation always consisted of a gathering of smaller substates. Though they were capable of uniting somewhat against an external aggressor, they spent most of their time and energy overcoming their local rivals. In a way, what happened inside the Confederation's borders pretty much mirrored what was happening outside. The Terran Confederation's planets and star systems were all fairly old. Lots of people lived there from generation to generation. The cities there not only reached up to the top of the atmosphere, they also dug in many reaches deep into the ground. You could imagine any conflict that would break out in such a densely populated environment resulted in a devastating loss of life. As the Terrans tried and failed to curb the widespread use of mechs to settle grudges and the like, they finally came together and figured out a compromise. The entire way of waging internal war turned from a no-holds-barred total war into a more gentlemanly way of duels and limited engagements. In short, each star system designated one empty planet or sometimes moon as the system's control area. The entity that controlled the entire planet had legitimate authority over the entire star system. For example, the ancient entity that ruled over the birthplace of mankind fortified a planet called Pluto. They made an agreement with the entire Confederation that so long as they held this tiny planet, they were entitled to rule over Earth, Mars, Venus, Mercury, and the other ancestral planets without any contention. They managed to do so since the founding of the treaty that set these rules. Naturally, not all of these so-called system rulers managed to withstand the test of time. Many weaker parties got kicked off from their designated defense planet, leading to a change in administration for those respective star systems. In practice, almost nothing changed for the commoners. Warfare got gentrified, and most of the damage and suffering got limited to the military and aristocratic classes. At the end of the read, VES found the structure to be enlightening. Though the Terrans warped war beyond all recognition, the damage that resulted from any conflict was fairly minimal. It allowed the Terrans to preserve the majority of its strength while leaving some outlets for local rulers to vent their expansionist urges. It's good for the commoners, but I can't say it has done any good for their national culture. The image the people of other states had of the Terrans was that they were rich, lazy, and decadent. They wasted so much wealth on senseless pastimes such as playing golf with asteroids or racing in flimsy shuttles and spitting distance to a sun. VES closed the second book and turned to the final one. It did not discuss the major laws of the new Robarth Empire or the Bright Republic, but instead was a more practical summary of what mech designers had to watch out for. He already knew most of the contents inside, such as not incorporating someone else's technology without procuring a license and such. Still, the book also explained some things VES was not aware of its existence. For example, the laws concerning the hiring of personnel. Mech designers were entitled to certain privileges that made them kings in their own workshops. They could impose all kinds of restrictions to their personnel, especially their mech technicians. Strict rules existed against leaking proprietary know-how that formed the basis of a mech designer's competitive advantage. It came to the point where mech technicians and junior mech designers had to choose their employer carefully. A rotten boss could use all kinds of means to pin an employee with a crime. VES realized he potentially avoided a calamity when he declined to work from the lower rungs of a larger mech corporation. If he got lucky, he could learn all kinds of tricks under a more experienced designer. But if his luck was lousy, his boss could treat him like a slave and get away with it. Even in the Bright Republic, which prided itself as a bastion of civilization in this barren star sector, the circumstances mech technicians had to face were very tough. Only the technicians from the Mech Corps and from the more generous Mercenary Corps enjoyed substantial rights. It's all about squeezing the maximum amount of value out of their employees. Only the most talented and the most connected get promoted. The rest have to toil for their entire lives in the same position. That was reality in a universe where automated production with bots and AIs took care of most of the heavy lifting. The MTA already did its best to encourage smaller artisan mech manufacturers to find their footing in this cutthroat industry. VES finished the final book at the end of the day. Though his ability to design and fabricate a mech hadn't improved, his comprehension of the workings of the universe deepened. He learned more about the rationale behind some rules and was able to adjust his future direction in light of new information. He went to sleep and digested the knowledge. The next day, VES received some good news. The second order for his Mark Antony finally arrived. Marcella contacted VES directly for a talk. Your newest client is someone special. Special in what way? Marcella looked as if she was constipated. He's the grandson of the majority shareholder of the Ricklin Corporation. While he has more than enough money to spend around, he has posed quite a few demands. You will need to be flexible and do your best to accommodate his requests if you wish to keep him as a client. That sounded completely opposite to his first client, who had a practical use for his mech. The Ricklin Corporation was the Bright Republic's main manufacturer of low-end processor chips. Practically every cheap bot and household machine featured a chip from Ricklin. While the profit margins of these chips were minuscule, the sales volume was gigantic. The shareholders of the Ricklin Corporation practically sat on a gold mine that churned out billions of credits in dividend each year. As a descendant of such a rich family, this new client should have very peculiar requests. Fabricating a customized mech for a rich second-generation brat was not what VES had in mind when he got into the mech business. Still, money was money, and the customer was king. I understand. I suppose he wants to meet me. Right. You'll have to take a trip to Bentheim. I've taken care of all the scheduling and reservations. If you aren't occupied with anything, I'd like you to embark on the next inter-system shuttle. I can leave for Bentheim immediately. VES quickly packed up a bunch of clothes and some other knickknacks. He called out Lucky and together they boarded a priority shuttle that swiftly brought them to the spaceport. As Marcella already booked him on a priority flight, VES had no trouble getting on board a small, luxury transit shuttle. It was a medium-sized passenger vehicle that regularly shipped businessmen and well-off tourists from Cloudy Curtain to Bentheim and back. Though VES looked a little out of place among the throng of middle-aged men and women, he casually leaned back against his comfortable seat and activated the projector in front of him to distract himself from the space flight. Lucky hung on his shoulder, sleeping yet again, the lazybones. He decided to dig up some news about his upcoming client and the Ricklin Corporation. The Ricklin Corporation listed in the top 50 of the Bright Republic Stock Exchange. Its profits were stable by maintaining an efficient production system that offered barely functional chips at bargain basement prices. Though other competitors offered much higher quality in their lineups, the Ricklin Corporation practically ruled the bottom segment of the market, which was also the biggest slice of the pie. With huge sales volume and an immense revenue, who cared if the profit margins were thin? Even the occasional stories of bad quality control and catastrophic failures in certain devices that used a Ricklin chip failed to stop the company's dominant market position in the Republic. The founders and largest shareholders of this company was the Ricklin family. Though they lent their name to the company they founded, they lost control of the board of directors when an incompetent family head squandered away a big portion of his family's shares. It happened during the last war between the Bright Republic and the Vija Kingdom, so there was definitely a murky story behind it all. In the end, the Ricklin family diminished and pulled back. Despite this dark incident, the Ricklin family maintained its wealth through cunning investments. They poured most of their energy into improving their financial expertise. Now they maintained their position in Bentheim's high society by relying on their profitable investment portfolio. That's rich people for you. It takes money to make money, and they have that in spades. Average people like me have to scrape for clients to earn a living. VES looked into the family tree of the Ricklins and focused on the direct descendants. The oldest son stood out immediately. The gossip rags that plied the galactic net featured plenty of articles about the young men in question. Vincent Ricklin claims he has bedded 10 girls at a time. Is he a stud or a menace? Vinny's drug-fueled binge led to a 15 shuttle pile-up, no word yet on casualties. The Ricklin Crown Prince chickened out of a mech duel. Disgraceful. Scammed. Vincent Ricklin misplaced 300 million credits after con artists convinced him to order a non-existent yacht. Certainly, the only person from the Ricklin family that took Marcella aback was Vincent Ricklin. No other scion of this rich and powerful family could be so extravagant in his spending. From the wild incidents the gossip mongers have publicized, VES got the idea that working with his latest client might not be a cakewalk. I sure have my work cut out for me. He sighed, and mentally prepared to interact with a man who likely held no inhibitions at all. Chapter 59, Package. As VES debarked from his shuttle with a curious Lucky in tow, his heart weighed down his mood. The articles he read about Vincent Ricklin all painted an ugly image of an irresponsible wastrel. As a serious mech designer, VES preferred his mechs be used in the purpose they had been built. He was okay with them collecting dust in a warehouse or put on display in some kind of private garage, but to play around with them and take them too lightly was pushing it. No mech designer liked to earn a reputation for making flashy mechs that lacked substance. Though it's not as if I have a choice. That someone like Vincent considered buying a mech from a newbie was miraculous. VES should thank the heavens for giving him another opportunity to fabricate and sell his variant. VES took a smaller shuttle to Marcella's brokerage. She owned a nice office in downtown Durham amid many other offices of major mech manufacturers and salesmen. Bollinger's Mechs. The giant name plastered on the small 5-story office made it clear that Marcella staked her claim on the entire building. Entering it, VES was impressed by the interior. It managed to look upscale without trying too hard at it. Subtle touches such as abstract paintings and authentic leather seats gave the place a swanky casino-like look. Simply put, the decor encouraged spending. A receptionist at the lobby directed VES to take a private lift. It seems like all bosses took the top floor, as VES shot straight up to the 5th story. After exiting the lift, he navigated a small hall and had security bots scan his possessions. As VES recently learned of the importance of security, he took the precautions in stride. He finally met Marcella in person again after entering past the double doors. "VES, good to see you again." She smiled at him from behind her desk. A pile of secure data slates sat in front of her messy desk. "Take a seat. We need to talk." After VES took his seat, he let out the thoughts bottling up in his mind. "I thought you'd work hard to get a customer. I did not expect you to deliver me a human form bomb. There are many kinds of customers in this business. As long as they have the ability to pay, you'd better get used to serving their whims." The broker had a point, of course. VES needed money and couldn't afford to be picky. "So tell me about the client. I take it he's the playboy that's on the news all the time." She nodded at that. "Vincent is a character. You shouldn't take everything that's on the news for granted. There's a lot going on in the Ricklin family, but they've done a good job suppressing leaks. In any case, you just need to know that while his allowance has been curbed, he won't have any problems paying for your mech." Naturally, that should be the case. VES wasn't about to trade his mechs for favors instead of money. "Do I need to pay attention to politics while I'm meeting with Vincent?" "That goes without saying. Now, don't get scared. I've been in this business for over 20 years and I'm still in one hide. As long as you keep your curiosity in check, there's nothing wrong with doing business in the big leagues." Marcella enumerated a couple of things to watch out for when talking to Vincent. Above all else, VES had to avoid talking about the family succession. He particularly should avoid any mention of Vincent's siblings. The broker also mentioned a couple of major players who had hostile relations with the Ricklin family. Frankly, VES found it ridiculous that he had to avoid so many topics. Still, he tried his best to remember all of the names. The last thing he wanted to do was to commit a faux pas and lose his precious commission. "I've scheduled a meeting for you tomorrow morning. While it's not too late right now in Durham, I don't advise you to meet with Vincent at this hour. Nightclubs can have an unpredictable influence in your client's mood." "That makes sense. I'm not in a hurry, so I can wait. Do you have a place to sleep?" While Marcella offered him a hotel, VES was fine with using her spare bedroom in the rear of her office floor to crash in. He played around with Lucky for an hour while thinking about the information he gathered so far. This commission reeked of trouble. This is probably like interacting with the little boss, only 10 times worse. In the perspective of some people, large rich families like the Ricklins were just thugs in a waistcoats. They usually relied on wealth and legitimate power to get their way, but weren't afraid to get their hands dirty if necessary. The next day, VES took the shuttle alone to a private mansion where Vincent currently lived. He evidently trashed the previous 4 mansions he lived in after he got kicked out from the home of his parents. Fortunately, the structure was intact. The gates and fences looked menacing and high-tech, but once security cleared his entry, he encountered a majestic Terran-style mansion. White-painted walls, imported tiles and brilliant glassworks dominated the decor. Everything about it spoke of sophistication. There was no way Vincent had any hand in its design. An old gentleman who served as Vincent's personal assistant led him to an indoor sports arena where Vincent was boxing against a bot. The artificial boxing bot fought back with brutal intensity. Even if its entire body was padded, the force of its steady strikes were so punishing that if VES faced its punch, all of his teeth would be knocked out. "Ha!" Vincent took a glancing blow in exchange for delivering a solid smack against the bot's face. The robot's head shined yellow as it indicated the amount of damage it received. Again. As the man and the bot exchanged punches with each other, VES already encountered his first unexpected surprise. The media often labeled Vincent as a lazy coward, but the effort he put up in his boxing was anything but cowardly. Still, VES chalked up Vincent's fitness to his family's rich resources. Anyone could develop his body to peak performance with genetic therapy and lots of drugs. After Vincent finally called it quits, he threw away his boxing gear and disrobed right in front of VES and the PA. Embarrassed, VES turned around while a bot appeared from somewhere and blasted Vincent with cleaning gel. After a dozen seconds passed, the cleaning bot disappeared and a clothing bot took its place. Luxurious fabrics made out of highly resilient fibers spun themselves together under the highly advanced bot's direction until Vincent's clothes materialized in full. "Who's the nerd?" was the first thing that came out of the client's mouth. "Sir, this is the mech designer you have requested to build your latest mech." "Oh right, you brought me the spare." too. Vincent spat a big glob of spit at the floor of the boxing ring. That asshole Edwin thinks he's too hot to sell me his products, and that fucking bitch Patricia won't even pick up my calls. They are designers sponsored and affiliated with much more formidable forces than ours. Mr. Larkinson here is the second-place winner of the Fusion Cup. His abilities may not be on par to theirs, but he should be sufficient for your wishes. Most importantly, he is an individual entrepreneur as is not beholden to any faction. Vincent stared at VES as if he was a bug. So, do you think you are good enough? That is your choice. The spec sheet of my product is available on the net. I'm sure you can see it's a mech that can keep up with others at its price point. Gutsy thing to say for a nerd. Follow me. The assistant and VES followed after Vincent as he stomped away from the sports hall and entered some kind of recreation room. Pool tables, sim pods, and all manner of entertainment were strewn about with no rhyme or reason. The Rickland scion headed towards a fully stocked bar and began to hand-mix his own drinks. I like to do this myself, you see. Letting the bots mix your drinks always gives you the exact same taste. Consistency is too boring. I like to seek out new thrills every day. VES wondered if this had anything to do with the mech he was making for his client. Now, I didn't ask to be born a potentate. It sure raised a lot of voices when I tested positive for the aptitude to pilot mechs. I've been puzzling about it for a while, and I recently decided to accept it and roll with it. Do you understand what I'm saying? Not really, but VES wasn't about to admit that. Instead, he ventured out a guess. You seek something unconventional in a mech. Exactly. Heh, the mainstream mechs are so boring. As far as I'm concerned, the pilots who buy standard military mechs aren't cut out to be aces. You have to shed your fears and embrace your risks. That's also exactly why I went off the beaten path and found your mech. It's a Caesar Augustus but with crappy armor, that's so unique. VES gently coughed in his hand. Mr. Rickland, while I'm sure my product is a satisfactory mech, shouldn't someone as eminent as you afford a better variant? The playboy's face immediately lost its excitement and took an awkward expression. VES realized he asked a question he shouldn't have. Fortunately, his personal assistant came to the rescue. We strictly controlling our expenses. Our allocated budget for a new mech does not allow for the procurement of a top-of-the-line mech. Your product satisfies my client's demands while remaining within his acceptable price range. VES could read between the lines. It appeared Daddy or Granddaddy Rickland had enough of Vincent's shenanigans and cut off his astronomical allowance. Vincent was probably squirming mentally at the thought of having to penny pinch like a regular human being. My design is already a finalized design. It is not easy to modify parts of it without making sure it won't adversely affect its performance. Vincent didn't appear pleased at those words, but VES found it important to add the disclaimer. I don't care about minor setbacks. If I can't look cool while I'm piloting a mech, what's the point of their existence anyway? There's a lot of dorky-looking mechs out there. I'd rather die than be caught in something a bunch of virgins fantasized about in bed. At least your mech looks sufficiently cool. I like the whole ancient Roman theme. I just have a couple of suggestions. VES groaned internally. It appeared the only reason why Vincent even considered buying his mech was because it looked cool. He guessed most of the so-called dorky-looking mechs were specialized models designed to excel in a specific area. Sure, they might look odd, but these models enjoyed plenty of sales as many pilots recognized their merits. All right, Vincent, let's hear it. I'll see if it's workable to add your ideas into a modified design. The socialite finished mixing something red and bubbly. He took a swig of his drink and yelled masculine ecstasy. Now that's more like it. Ahem, yeah, about the mech. First up, it needs a cape. Cape. Fuck man, your mech already looks like a pimp, it just needs a cape to complete the ensemble. Trust me, it looks fucking great if your mech has a cape. It has to be red of course, or else it won't fit with the theme. Make it long and flowy, and don't think about using cheap fabric. If you need access to something fancy, I can refer you to a few friends I know. VES didn't take the suggestion seriously, but he was forced to consider the practicalities of using a cape. Any normal fabric would tear easily if the mech mistakenly stepped on it. If VES wanted to preserve the cape when the mech who wore it only performed light duties, then VES had to pick something synthetic and a little stronger. I'll need to investigate what kind of specialized fabrics I can use to form the cape, so I might take you up on your offer. That's great. The cape's really my top priority here. Another thing I'd like to add is decorative lighting. Come on, all my sports cars turn into babe magnets as soon as I turn on the bling. Why no one ever thought to make a mech as flashy as possible is beyond me. Right, I need lots of lights running on the frame, and better add a couple of super-duper powered searchlights to the head. There were lots of reasons why mech designers refused to incorporate decorative lighting in their designs. Not only did they add vulnerabilities to the armor and electrical system of a mech, they also pointed a giant "Hit Me" sign on their frames. It was apparent such arguments were lost to the client. I can figure something out. Give me a day to draft a bunch of sketches of possible design schemes. Right. You're okay for a nerd, Vincent said as he took yet another swig of his drink. Okay, the cape and the lights are just to pave the way. Now sit tight, because I'm going to reveal my secret idea to you. If you know what's good for you, then keep it for yourself. Clear? Clear. Vincent grinned slyly at VES. Since you're a mech designer, you must have heard how smart people say that mechs are built to resemble humans, right? Well, ever since I got roped into learning how to pilot one, I can see what these old people are saying. There's just one thing that's nagging me every time I step behind the cockpit. And that is. The mech pilot thrust out his hips and grabbed at his front end. This. My package. For once, VES was speechless. He literally couldn't form any response to this insane idea. Now, I don't mean to get arrested for streaking with my mech. You should design some mech pants or whatever to keep it kid-friendly and all. Just make sure that when I'm out and about with my new mech, girls will be able to judge the goods, if you know what I mean. There was so many things wrong with this completely impractical demand. While Vincent kept espousing the benefits of boasting an enhanced mech, VES turned his gaze towards the Playboy's silent personal assistant. VES managed to convey an expression that went along the lines of, "Are you kidding me?" To his credit, the old man was unflappable and never hinted at any disrespect for his young master. His eyes were sharp as a hawk and he seemed to suggest that VES better take his master's request seriously. What VES would rather do was to take the strongest drinks of Vincent's bar and gulp it all down. He could already foresee his reputation going down the drain if he continued to cooperate with Vincent. Chapter 60, Capricious. Vincent Ricklin unbelievably went on for about 10 minutes on the importance of manhood in mechs. He really believed almost all mechs were gender neutral. As a bona fide man, Vincent hated the thought of mentally castrating himself whenever he piloted a mech. Naturally, someone immersed in mechs such as VES had no problem with the lack of gender indications. Mechs were only designed to emulate the human form in order to perform better as a war machine. Adding unnecessary extensions such as hair, skin, or gender expressions did not add anything to a mech's battle performance. Frankly, only an extremely vain pilot who cared more for his looks than his battle record could demand something like this. VES had the misfortune of making a mech for this kind of person. This is an extremely complicated addition. Let me think about it for a day or two. It's not easy to add mass in the front part of the waist. Actually, VES wanted to ditch Vincent and go back to Marcella and demand they drop him as a client. Vinny was only up to his third request and already the envisioned mech turned impractical. His comm beeped with a priority message. VES halted Vincent's rant with a raised palm. Sorry Vincent, I set my comm to notify me if there's something extremely urgent going on. Can I take this call? Sure. I'll just mix another drink. Vinny said casually as he turned his back and grabbed a couple of random bottles on the shelves. His mail did not receive a message from Marcella, Melinda, or any other acquaintance. Instead, he received a plain text message from an account named The System. Mission, Gender Change Operation. Difficulty, C rank. Prerequisites, none. A mech designer never cowers before a challenge. To be a successful designer is to be adventurous in testing new concepts. To complete this mission, you must satisfy your client's wishes and deliver a mech he can cherish as his personal war steed. Reward, random attribute candy worth 0.5 attribute points, 3,000 design points. The mech designer's eyes bulged when he read through the message. The capricious system proactively gave him another mission. While that might not always be bad due to the generous rewards it always offered, but this time it meant continuing to work with the Ricklin boy. He really needed the rewards. He'd regret it for the rest of his life if he passed them by in his haste to avoid a troublesome client. That 3,000 DP looked very tasty considering VES would need to spend months just to accumulate that much. VES slowly relaxed his body. He couldn't always run away from his customers no matter how unseemly they behaved. It was better to take on the challenge as best he could and treat it as another training exercise. He took a deep breath and faced Vincent again. Did you suggest this idea to any other mech designer? PFFF. Vincent spat out disgruntledly, spilling out a few drops of alcohol in the process. I got a hold of Patricia Schneider. When I tried to impress her of my genius plan, she straight up shut her comm. Now, she won't even answer me back after a million calls. No wonder she rejected Vincent to the point of ignoring him. Besides the obvious, the mere suggestion that a mech designer add some mass to a mech's front waist was an idiotic idea with no possible merit. Yet VES started to consider it seriously. In fact, he changed his entire mindset and suppressed his skeptical viewpoint. He had to throw away pretty much all rational thoughts in order to entertain Vincent's outlandish ideas. While it's difficult to, enhance a mech's endowment, it would be easier if it's made of flexible material. Are you amenable to using fluids or a sponge-like material? It will be much easier to realize, and you will have the flexibility to vary the size while you're piloting your mech. Fuck yes. That's a fantastic suggestion. Just don't make it too soft or fragile. The last thing I want to happen is letting my manhood deflate like a balloon. Alright, let's settle for these points. VES hastily said, trying to push this little session to a close before Vincent mentioned something even more outlandish. After all, you don't want your customized mech to be too burdened with bling. Vinny blinked a little as he finished his latest drink. He burped loudly, allowing the raw alcoholic smell to waft over VES. Whatever you say, man. Adding all of what I've mentioned so far is pretty good enough. It'll surely pump up my personal mech up there at the top of the cool chart. The increasingly drunk playboy started to drift off as he grew increasingly drunk. VES tried to disengage himself from the conversation several times, only to be pulled back as Vinny vented his frustrations about what he thought were uncool mechs. It took well over an hour before VES hurriedly stepped out of Vincent's mansion. He heard more than enough opinions about how mechs should really look like according to the Ricklin scion. At least he came out of the lengthy exchange with had a very good picture of Vincent's aesthetic tastes. He wished he could get on the next passenger shuttle back to Cloudy Curtain, but he reconsidered after a moment. If he wanted to complete the system's mission as best as possible, then it was crucial that he frequently consult with his client in order to avoid taking a wrong turn. Thus, he called up Marcella on his comm and asked her for a secure workplace where he could customize his design in peace. Absolute security doesn't exist, you know, but I can tell you that Durham's MTA branch rents out the most trustworthy design studios. It'll cost you a bit, but I'll call ahead and cover the cost for you as a favor. Just don't let Vincent down. It won't do your reputation any good if you drop the ball with your second produced mech. I know. Despite Vincent's many eccentricities, I'm determined to make it work. Just make sure you charge him enough to make it worthwhile. Oh, don't worry about that VES. As long as he's happy, he'll bleed his credits until he's dry. They both chuckled at each other. VES and Marcella were of one mind when it concerned earning as much credits as possible. VES rerouted his shuttle to go on a straight path towards the MTA. It only took a couple of minutes to reach a sprawling complex an entire neighborhood wide. Security was extremely stringent here. The shuttle automatically descended and landed on a security pad. Bots led by a human inspector meticulously searched the shuttle and him for any dangers. It was a bit unpleasant, but necessary. You're clear to go. VES resumed his trip as he looked around. This was his first time visiting the MTA's main branch in the Bright Republic. The tiny outpost in Cloudy Curtain paled in comparison to the might and resources of the Bentheim branch. A great number of mech stables dotted the area. He imagined the MTA likely possessed the second most numerous mechs of any single power. Only the Republic's mech corps had stationed more mechs on this planet. When he finally reached the reception hall, he hopped out the shuttle and took a constantly curious Lucky with him into the structure. The entire building was built to impress. Built in a refracting glass and crystal style, it seemingly emanated that the MTA was an open place where knowledge was shared freely. However, some might interpret it more nefariously and suggest that no one could hide anything from their watchful eyes. In any case, besides the system, VES had nothing to hide. Though the system still nested deep inside his comm, he wasn't too worried about keeping it a security. No casual security sweep could ever detect it and its remarkable properties. Ah, good evening, Mr. Larkinson. I see you are registered in Cloudy Curtain. How can I help? I'm here on business customizing a design for a client. I'd like to rent a secure design studio. I'm sure an associate of mine has already booked one for my use. Can you check it out? Ah, I see. Mrs. Bollinger has just registered a secure suite for you. The secretary swiped her hand, allowing a small green projection to emerge from the reception desk. Please follow the virtual guide to reach your assigned destination. Have a good evening. The ball slowly hovered away from the desk and out the hall. VES followed leisurely after the green ball as it led deeper into the MTA's periphery. The core areas were all closed to outsiders, but the outer areas of the complex was already sufficiently large that it took 15 minutes of walking before he reached his destination. He clearly reached a section specialized in providing services to mech designers. He saw plenty of interesting structures such as a library, a financial services consultancy, a junkyard filled with spare parts and more. The structure that held the design studios on the other hand looked fairly plain in comparison. After another security scan, VES finally entered the enclosed hallways and entered his assigned studio. The electronically isolated room was fairly Spartan in appearance. Besides a seat, a desk and a terminal, it held little else. VES could only barely spot the high-fidelity projectors in the walls and ceilings that allowed him to look at his designs in utmost detail. These systems were leagues ahead of the cheap consumer projectors in his own workshop. He turned on the terminal and swiped the design of the Mark Antony into its temporary storage. The professional projectors turned alive. A grand mech came into existence in the middle of the room. The resolution and fidelity of the projection astounded VES. He even touched it experimentally, and could feel a soft resistance from his fingers. The degree of this simulation exceeded his expectations. A small smirk appeared on his lips. The MTA sure is extravagant in everything they do. Witnessing this small wonder helped VES adjust his mood. After learning an important lesson from designing the Speed Demon, VES knew he could not keep dwelling on what he couldn't do. Designing a mech was a labor of love. If he didn't love it as he built up its design, then it wouldn't be brought to life as a happy mech. He considered the design process to be akin to raising a child. The so-called child in this case was just a mech, but it was still somewhat capable of inheriting the mental disposition of the designer. If he hated the design process and constantly cursed in frustration, then his mech wouldn't have a good future, just like a child who grew up to be a troublemaker. Alright, enough adjusting. Let's get to work. VES wanted to address the easiest points first, so he started with the cape. In essence, VES could finish the job in a minute by just picking a random fabric, dye it red, and affix it onto a mech's shoulders. Merely, the cape was too fragile to last more than a few minutes of intensive mech piloting. As multi-ton monstrosities, mechs were often subjected to high-powered stresses. If the mech ever stepped on the fabric, it would tear apart as easily as a child ripping a piece of paper into half. It's got to be a short cape, with supports added to its length to make sure it doesn't get entangled in the mech's frame. By stiffening and straightening the cape's lining, he could prevent the fabric from flapping into anything dangerous. While it might make the adornment lose some of its organic liveliness, VES thought it was a worthwhile sacrifice. I need to search for a suitable material. The terminal had a direct connection to the MTA's internal market. As VES searched for advanced fabrics, he only received a couple of dozen results. Naturally, none of them were used in making stupid capes for mechs. Instead, they served other purposes such as enhancing a cockpit's upholstery. He straight up filtered out all the delicate materials from his search results. The list was left with more robust materials, all of which different from each other in many ways. VES went over the products one by one, but found very little that satisfied his needs. Though some fabrics were designed to withstand rough use, that only applied to human use. Scale the forces applied to the materials up to a mech and they'd part as easy as a spider web. This is a fruitless search. No matter how strong these advanced fabrics are, they were never designed to handle the stresses from meshs. His search for a suitable material required a different approach. Instead of getting hooked on the traditional meaning of capes, he should instead consider whether Vincent even cared if his cape was made out of real fabric. A technically illiterate meathead like him won't even be able to tell the difference. With that in mind, he searched for a different kind of material. It had to somewhat resemble the thickness and malleability of a sheet of fabric, but it should be much more resilient. The list that the terminal spat out was a lot more extensive. From thin sheets of flexible armor to reinforced padding for delicate cabling, VES found the selection to be a lot more extensive. He carefully refined his results and combed out the unacceptable choices. Thicker materials such as flexible armor did not flap at all when a wind blew through them. On the other hand, the thinnest materials could withstand some damage but not too much. It took VES a bit of time to whittle down the extremes and end up with a small selection of products that possessed the right characteristics. Instead of making the choice on my own, I can send it to Vincent and have him take care of the procurement. After all, the products left on his screen all shared many similarities. Their toughness was derived out of a clever weaving of specialized synthetics and thinly threaded metals. A tough matrix support kept the fabric from getting torn too easily, though they did cut back on the material's fluidity. Nevertheless, they met almost all other requirements, so VES hoped Vincent would find them acceptable. He composed a short message to Vincent and added the links to the materials for him to see. After sending off that mail, VES turned to his next task. His face already took on an exasperated expression. Somehow, he had to turn his mech into a light show. Chapter 61, Design Studio. VES was not immersed in the whole shuttle racing scene. As someone focused on mechs his entire life, the sleek personal transport shuttles that were capable of both atmospheric and space flight held little appeal to him. That did not mean others found them unworthy of their time. In fact, lots of norms worshipped shuttles. They paid fanatical attention to each newly released shuttles and liked to customize and tinker their own vehicles in their free time. Adding some decorative lighting was just one of the ways a fanatic distinguished himself among his peers. He looked over some footage on the galactic net and found it to be a basic concept. It could be as simple as adding a few colored stripes to adding in an elaborate artistic pattern. It impressed VES that these hobbyists cobbled up evocative looks for their shuttles. I won't be able to get Vincent's approval if I half-ass this job. The best-looking vehicles didn't necessarily have the most lights. Instead, the artists who customized them used patterns and other artistic tricks to maximize the impact of each streak of light. If VES wanted to keep up, he had to be a little inventive. What would fit my Mark Antony? He left the galactic net and opened the mech design program. As a software developed by the MTA itself, it possessed elaborate features. Still, they were not on par with the mech designer system's own suite except for the projectors. The MTA's design studio incorporated high-quality projection systems that could bring any image to life. When the imposing image of the Mark Antony appeared in the middle of the room, VES circled the projection and slowly considered his ideas. The mech looked like an armored soldier. With its vapor-generated helmet crest and heavy rectangular shield, it looked purpose-built for war. VES also chuckled to himself that it looked quite dashing. What he had to do now was to figure out a way to enhance the mech's cool factor without being too overboard. Luckily, most lighting systems are cheap and don't require a license. After all, they were mainly made to customize shuttles. Getting my hands on a suitable lighting system isn't hard. What's a little harder is that their toughness sucks. He faced the same problem as with the cape. These kinds of accoutrements just weren't designed to accommodate a fighting machine. While there were a few systems designed for traffic control or rescue mechs that possessed a little more reinforcement, they fell short when put into active combat situations. Maybe I've been influenced too much by the way these lighting systems are applied to shuttles. I don't have to follow the exact same scheme for my mech. He considered designing a standard scheme as well as add something extra. As a mech accumulated damage, it generally looked worse. In order to placate Vincent in the event he ended up in a real battle, VES decided to use that property to add internal lighting that wouldn't be visible unless the armor got torn open. As VES knew his design best, he already had an idea how to structure the internal lighting. He had no trouble marking out many small areas where a small but powerful light source could be placed. As the lights didn't really suck up that much energy compared to other systems, VES didn't even bother with adding power cables to keep them running. Instead, he added wireless power transmitters nestled deeper in the mech to provide power without relying on delicate and easily damaged cabling. To be certain it matched Vincent's standard of coolness, VES tested out his change. When VES used the design program's simulation module to simulate accumulating damage, he found the mech to be glowing increasingly red from the cracks in its armor. Against the backdrop of the mech's predominantly black coating, the ominous red glow enhanced the menacing aura. Inspired by this savage look, VES took up a sketching program and drafted a couple of lines on the mech's wireframe model. He predominantly added jagged lines, akin to the stylized lightning bolts on the shield, which he also sketched over with some light streaks. He colored it mostly red except for the lights on the shield, which were shaded a bright yellow. When VES stepped back and let the design program simulate the lighting scheme, he was impressed by his own work. The light scheme enhanced the ancient warrior theme of his mech. The sharpness of the jagged, diagonal lines gave the mech the impression that it was a war god descended from the heavens. Though it looks good, I'm not sure if Vincent will like it. He has a very discerning taste. To be safe, VES spent an entire day racking his brain for alternate design patterns. He slept, ate, and showered at the room's basic living facilities but spent the rest of his time crunching his brain. Lucky got so bored that VES activated the guide program to release a projected ball that flew around erratically for his cat to chase around. His hard work allowed him to come up with a few viable-looking designs. He made a white lightning bolt pattern to evoke a lightning god feel and a green curving pattern to contrast nicely with the red accents. He finished his design session by forming a yellow pattern that evoked speed. As he projected the different lighting schemes side by side, he had to admit that while they did the job, they fell short of greatness. VES simply lacked the practice and proficiency to go beyond the basic one-color lighting schemes. Mixing 2 or 3 colors together in a harmonious whole was a lot more difficult than he thought. If Vincent is really dissatisfied by my attempts, he should just hire his own artist, he concluded. As someone who looked familiar with the shuttle racing scene, Vincent must have his own contacts. He sent the sketches to Vincent and called it a day. He'd been staying in the design studio for more than a day now. Thinking of all the trouble he went through so far, he hoped Vincent was good for the money when VES finally delivered his product. After stepping out of the design studio, he called up an automatic guide that led him to the MTA's visitor cafeteria. Just because he ate some instant rations didn't mean he appreciated them. He looked forward to grabbing a more proper bite. As thousands of pilots, designers and technicians visited the MTA each day in Durham, its dining facilities were top-notch. Those with more discerning tastes could enter the nearby restaurant, while those who were fine with cheaper food prepared by the best bots visited the cafeteria. As VES picked a couple of his favorite meats, he took a random seat and started to dig in. Just as he finished chewing, a firm hand clapped his back. VES. What a surprise to see you here. VES turned around and saw a young woman he hadn't seen since his last visit to Bentheim. Charlotte. Charlotte Hofmeister grinned as she bumped the seat next to him and hopped on it. She dropped her plate of food with a small clatter, causing bits and pieces of food to spill to the side. We haven't been in touch for a while. So what are you up to? He shrugged. I'm in the process of customizing my first commercial variant mech for a client. I recently completed a sale a few weeks ago and now I'm here to meet the needs of my second client. Charlotte raised her eyebrow in appreciation as she gnawed at her chicken drumstick. Looks like your business is already up and running. That's nice. There's way too many dumbass who think they're all that but flounder when they finally start on their own. I was luckier than most. VES said reservedly, not wanting to disparage his fellow designers. After all, before the system came he was one of them. I'm not doing great, but I'm sure I can overcome my troubles if I work hard enough. That's the spirit. Charlotte pounded the table with her palm. Look at me. Despite coming up second to a side tournament, I'm one of only 3 new recruits for the MTA's enforcement division from this year's graduating class. Oh, congratulations. No wonder you look so great in your new piloting suit. VES was genuinely impressed at Charlotte's accomplishment. The MTA's enforcement division might have a reviled reputation among outsiders, but mech designers in particular appreciated them for keeping the peace and deter shady manufacturers from stealing their designs. Their prestige was a step up from the Republic's own mech corps, as their recruitment standards were incredibly stringent. I'm still a trainee for now, but you can bet I'm going to places you can't even imagine. Too bad I had to give the Kirby back to the academy. I miss that big old lug, even if it took a nasty beating in the tournament. The two shared a few words on more inconsequential subjects before Charlotte had to go back to her training. I'll see you around, VES. Keep up the good work. I'll be sure to spread the word. Thanks a lot. I appreciate any help I can get. Having met Charlotte reminded him he hadn't gotten in touch with any of his friends in a while. Of course, everyone drifted off to pursue their own career, but he should at least get in touch with Carlos now that he had the time. VES dug up his name from his comm and called him up to see if he was available. Evening, VES. Man, I thought you dropped off the edge of the universe. Look who's back. Haha, I've been occupied with my own work, but I happen to be here on Bentheim for business. Do you want to meet up? Sure. I know just the place to take you if you're visiting Bentheim for the first time. It's a must-visit attraction of our planet. Carlos sent a standardized set of coordinates to him that he could feed into a aircar service. I'll be waiting for you at that place. Shrugging, VES finished his food and left the cafeteria. He boarded a small hovering platform to reach the exit of the complex faster. As he looked back at the imposing base, he sighed at the power of the MTA. They possessed military might far beyond even the best mercenary corps in the Republic. After he hailed an aircar, he fed the piloting system the coordinates and let the car take him to where Carlos waited. He looked outside the window and admired the sprawling urban forest outside. Not even the dignified Rittersburg could ever compare to the liveliness of Bentheim. The shuttle finally descended on the outskirts of Durham. It turned out the coordinates Carlos fed was a large open-air mech coliseum, with several smaller arenas placed around the main attraction. It somewhat resembled the stadium and convention center where the YTE was held, but this one was obviously privately owned. The mood here was much more dynamic. The abundant visitors all wore branded clothing that featured their favorite mechs or celebrities. Even from this distance, VES could feel the savage thrum and collisions of real mechs battling it out in front of an audience. The cost of operating this enterprise must run up to the billions, but from the amount of fans that visited the matches, it evidently ran very smoothly. His friend waited just inside the gate. After paying the admission fee, VES met up with Carlos and hugged him loosely. Good to see you again. How's it going at work? SOSO. I'm still learning the ropes. It takes time for me to move up in such a large organization. But look at you. You're a successful mech designer now, having at least one sale under your belt. Most of the other people from our class are really jealous at you, you know. VES wasn't bothered by the thoughts of others. If they think they can do better, then let them start their own businesses. Naturally, that was nearly impossible. Both of them smiled at each other as they knew that. Carlos shook his head. Well, enough about that. Let's head inside. I've been saving up these promotional tickets for the amateur ring for a year. Might as well use them up now. They talked about what they had been doing since the last time they met. VES talked about some of the challenges he faced. When he talked about the excitement of building a mech with your own hands, Carlos looked envious. Man, you're much further ahead in your career than me. I'm still stuck in the same old drudgery of checking mechs for faults. It's been a few months. Hang in there. With your skill set, you should expect a promotion soon enough. VES and Carlos had reached the entrance of the smallest and shabbiest-looking arena. As cleaning bots were cheap nowadays, VES figured the organizers intentionally kept its walls weathered. The scanners at the gates allowed them entry once Carlos showed his tickets. They climbed the stairs and entered the interior of a wide arena that could host up to 100,000 people if a major event was going on. As it was just a normal day, the arena was only filled up to a third of its capacity. Frankly speaking, the promotional tickets Carlos won from who knows where were not all that valuable. VES could easily afford entry now that he potentially earned millions with each mech sale. Still, he wasn't used to being wealthy, so he still appreciated Carlos' gesture. They found a pair of seats that brought them close to the middle of the arena. Several fans were chugging their beers or eating their junk food as they yelled at the duelists in the arena. Apparently, two light mechs were on stage. As they were rather fragile, they both played very conservatively. It led to quite a few boos from the disgruntled audience. Man, I always hate it when these light mechs are dancing around all the time. It's like they're competing on who will run out of energy first. Light mechs might be cheap, but it still costs quite a bit to repair any damage. VES noted. Personally, if I were to bring a mech onto a stage, I'd go for a medium weight. It was easy to say this, but not every pilot had the means to buy a good medium mech. Most of the lower rungs were unable to cough up enough money for a decently armored mech. As VES keenly knew, the most expensive component of any mech was its armor plating. In today's manufacturing environment, as long as the materials weren't too exotic, any delicate or intricate machinery could be replicated with 3D printers and other advanced manufacturing machines. However, no matter how advanced mankind's production capabilities had grown, they could not make gold out of lead. Good materials led to great end products, and nowhere was this more evident than the current state of mech armor. Tricks such as modular armor, quantum scaffolding, and other buzzwords hadn't measured up to their promises. In the end, armor developers resorted to the simplest solutions of finding the best base materials to work with. The Milky Way galaxy was immense, and many unconventional stars proved breeding grounds of highly desirable exotic materials. Natural, due to the special circumstances in which they were formed, they were also notoriously scarce. That meant that the mining companies that exploited these valuable mining areas made a killing. VES heard a rumor in which a top-of-the-line mech from a first-rate superstate could cost up 1 trillion bright credits. That was an unimaginable sum of money in the perspective of the Bright Republic, but it would only cause a citizen of a superstate to blink their eyes. In any case, VES and Carlos talked a bit about their own preferences while casually paying attention to the slow-going dance-off on stage. However, VES felt a nervous tension from his friend. Evidently, Carlos had another purpose in mind when he asked to meet up with VES. He wasn't even interested in the matches at all. No matter how exciting the amateurs fought on stage, Carlos never batted an eye. VES wondered what was going on. Carlos couldn't be in trouble, right? Chapter 62, Leviticus. So anyway, I didn't only invite you here to talk about old times. To be honest, I wanted to ask you something. Oh. VES raised his eyebrow. What's that? Carlos stopped paying attention to the match entirely and turned to face VES with the most serious face he had ever seen on his friend. You know what kind of job I have now. Even if you say I'm likely to move out of my current position, it will take many years, perhaps even decades before I go anywhere near the development process of a new design, and that's only if I resign and switch companies, as the current one I work for is just a wholesaler which buys completed mechs from other manufacturers. You can't rush a career, Carlos. I've seen you studying for nights on end back in college. You've got a good head on your shoulder. Any employer will be bound to appreciate your talents. But I can't wait that long. Carlos shook his head. A successful mech designer always starts his career when he's young, we both know that. So what if I wait until I'm in my 80s or 90s until a company sees fit to include me in their research and development department? I'll be playing second fiddle to a 30 or 40-year-old who is either a genius or who had the right connections for the job. I don't want to be an expendable cog in the machine. VES had an idea what Carlos was going for with his little rant. He wasn't sure if he liked it. That's the way the world works. The ones with the silver spoon in their mouths already have their foot in the door. Us regular people need to either take risks or just keep working out butts off to close the disparity between us and them. There's no shortcuts. Carlos' eyes burned. I admire you, VES. I already said that, but it bears repeating. You've taken that gamble. You looked at that impossibly tall mountain and successfully climbed the top. From getting the equipment together to receiving a couple of production licenses as grants, you got through every obstacle in the way of starting your wholly owned mech business. I'm not like you. I can't climb in your footsteps. But you want to work for me. Accept a lower position under my employ and grow along with me. The pair stayed silent for a time. Carlos nodded then, looking a little bit pained as he had to accept a status that was lower than VES. I can't climb the mountain myself, but if you drop down some rope, I can pull myself up. I've been doing fine on my own so far. What makes you think I need an extra hand? VES asked with a bit of reservation in his tone. Having worked with many mech manufacturers delivering crappy mechs, I know a bit how they work. Someone like you can't shoulder all of the jobs of running an independent mech design and fabrication studio alone. You need someone to do the grunt work of fabricating mechs at the very least. VES released a sigh. He had indeed been thinking of hiring a fabricator. I appreciate your honesty in telling me your ambition. But it's going to be awkward if I'm going to be your boss. I'm looking for someone in the near future to fill up the fabricator position in my workshop, but since it concerns certain trade secrets, I'm hesitant in letting anyone else work under my direction. Then that's an even better reason to consider taking me under your wing. You know me and I know you. We've been pals for years. I'm 100% sure you don't trust anyone more than me when it comes to getting your hands dirty with mechs. He had a point. VES did not have too many friends in the mech circles. Hiring a stranger was a complete gamble as far as he was concerned. He could spend an excessive time screening potential employees and still get burned by them. Sure, with the current laws in place, he possessed a lot of means to make abusers pay for it, but enforcing a punishment after the deed was done did not help him out in the long run if certain secrets were exposed. Right now, VES relied on two advantages to grow his nascent business. His implementation of the X Factor was a delicate secret that if exposed might change the mech industry substantially if other designers could be convinced of its existence. However, that progress would come at a cost to his own competitiveness. He wasn't so good-natured enough to expose the secrets of the X Factor to the public. Besides, there might be a small but highly placed circle out there who knew about the X Factor but kept it among themselves. If VES somehow leaked the details of their golden goose, they may decide to make an example out of him. VES wanted to avoid attracting such high-profile attention. As for the other advantage, the system could absolutely not be exposed. He had run through all the possible scenarios hundreds of times, and none of them gave him a good end. I need to think about it. I'm still working on my second ever sale. It's still too early for me to consider a hire. I'll reconsider your proposal once my mech business picks up in sales. That gave VES an excuse to hold off Carlos. He didn't want to reject him directly, but neither did he want to bring Carlos back to Cloudy Curtain immediately. Having no other choice, Carlos slumped and nodded his head. Okay. I'll be waiting for your answer. It's not like my current career is going anywhere in the meantime. After moving past this conversation, VES tried to lift their spirits and started to comment on the happenings in the amateur ring. As the matches went by, he noticed a pattern in the pilots that chose to exhibit their combat skills in the lowest ring. Half of the mech pilots who performed in the amateur ring were often young rich hotshots with too much money and not enough sense. As such, the younger pilots often took daring risks, as the newborn calves are not afraid of tigers. VES found their mechs to be interesting. They ran almost the entire spectrum of close to medium-ranged mechs. As this arena was fairly small, snipers and artillery mechs had no place in this setting. Still, with their souped-up mechs adorned with various holographic stickers of tigers or pin-up girls, these mech pilots behaved as if they were stars. However, Old Ginger is spicier. The other half of the pilots on stage often consisted of veterans too impaired to serve in the field. Often suffering from various wounds, these grizzled pilots were not resigned to spend the rest of their days in retirement. While their mechs were often cheaper compared to the rich kids, their extensive proficiency and battle experience made up for their gear. As they had more to lose, they often fought very conservatively, to the point of giving up the match before they were about to suffer catastrophic damage. The contrast between the two types of pilots often led to the most exciting matches. The ultra-aggression of the younger generation often pressured the more cautious older generation into defending against an onslaught. Both the attacker and defender relied on different skills to capitalize on any mistake their opponents made. That's Leviticus coming up on stage. Carlos yelled as he rose up from his seat. He's my favorite pilot in the amateur ring. VES beheld the pilot and mech that caught the eye of his friend. Even without his expertise in mechs, he could tell the old machine was on its last legs. The armor was such a crazy patchwork of plates that it was hard to tell if there were any original plates left. The stride of the mech also looked uneven, as if the left leg held a fraction less power than the right one. As for its weapons, it obviously used to hold shoulder mounts, but only crude holes remained where they sat. It wielded a crudely shaped staff that might have been a reshaped construction beam as its only weapon. That's a really terrible mech. Why are you rooting for this guy? Man, you don't know about Leviticus. Carlos looked at VES as if he was an alien. Man, you've been living off the grid for too long. Is that backwater planet so remote you can't even keep up with the arena anymore? Hey, I've been busy with work. I quit following the scene a half-year ago. Carlos shrugged and explained his fascination for Leviticus. Anyway, this guy's special. Unlike all the other active pilots, he's a borderline potentate. He's really unlucky in that regard. That surprised VES, causing him to look at Leviticus and his mech a second time. Now that he looked closer, the movements weren't as fluid as a regular mech. The minute stutters and jerky shifts were the typical symptoms of either a malfunctioning neural interface or a pilot that possessed bad aptitude. They say that lacking the aptitude to pilot a mech isn't the worst thing in the world. Carlos continued, completely forgetting for the moment that VES used to aspire to be a pilot as well. There's a fate worse than being a norm, and that is being a potentate that barely passes the threshold. I see. Leviticus shouldn't be able to pilot a mech this good if he's a borderline case. That's because he's putting in twice as much work into piloting than any other potentate. You can't imagine the long hours he spent trying to speed up his response. If a regular pilot operates at 100%, he's overclocking himself to perform 150% of his potential. That genuinely sounded impressive. He looked as the scrappy medium mech bowed at its opponent, a gleaming blue light mech that just happened to be the nemesis of Leviticus. The worst thing a pilot with a slowed response speed could encounter was a light mech that specialized in speed. Yet still, more than half of the crowd still rooted for Leviticus, Carlos included. VES was confused at everyone's enthusiasm. It was as if the possibility of Leviticus losing did not occur in their minds at all. What's up with the crowd? Oh, you'll see. Don't think my man Levi can be beat so easily. He'll pull off a miracle, as he did many times. The match started. Predictably, the blue light mech started to circle around the medium mech at close to the maximum possible speed. Leviticus stayed still, not even attempting to turn to keep up with the light mech's orientation. Eventually, the opponent reached the rear of the medium mech and darted forward with its twin daggers ready. Yet before either blade struck, Leviticus caused his mech to fall over backwards. He did it in such a way that allowed him to place one end of the staff in a direct collision course to his approaching enemy. The light mech tried to veer away, but Leviticus timed his improvised action just close enough for him to guarantee a hit. The light mech, to its credit, used the utmost of its maneuverability to shift its impact zone from the middle of its chest to its right shoulder. A lot of people in the audience groaned as the staff managed to dig out a clump of armor but nothing else. VES knew they didn't just groan for no reason. One of the more macabre attractions of the arenas was that fatalities were not uncommon. If it happened once or twice, then so be it. But they happened so regularly that people recognized there was more going on. In fact, the safety measures built into each competing mech were of such an inferior standard that many suspected the owners of the arena deliberately cheaped out on them. It was a far cry to the extensive and reliable safety measures used to keep the YTE free from spilling any blood. Nevertheless, the light mech hopped backwards and well out of reach of Leviticus. It took in the damage it suffered and started to calculate its options. However, Leviticus did not give his opponent an opportunity to come up with another answer. With obvious effort, his mech started to jog towards the opponent. The light mech instinctively leaped backwards and continued to widen the distance in order to avoid getting caught. The chase continued for several minutes, but VES found it strange that Leviticus even attempted to chase. A medium mech could never catch up to a light mech, after all. His opponent realized that too, and started to calm down. Its retreating pattern became more exquisite and it always made sure never to get stuck in a corner. What's this guy up to? Haha, no idea, but he always pulls something crazy that will tip the scales in his favor. Looking closer, VES recognized that Leviticus conserved his energy. He always made the best turns and moved to cut off the light mech with the least amount of steps. Meanwhile, the constant hopping around boosted the energy consumption of the light mech to an unsustainable rate. The energy reserves are only topped off up till 20% in the amateur ring, right? Yeah, that hasn't changed. The last thing anyone wants to see is a battle of attrition. In a real battle, the mechs should be able to sustain their rate of consumption for a while. However, with just a limited charge going in the ring, a race to see who exhausted itself first always ended fairly quickly. Indeed, the light mech's pilot seemed to realize his predicament, and stopped his endless running. He was facing the dilemma any light mech pilot faced when facing a superior opponent. He could keep running, but waste more energy than his opponent, or he could fight but risk coming off worse as his tonnage was smaller than the enemy's. Eventually, he decided to compromise and made small, flanking attacks. Leviticus never seemed to keep up with the light mech's turns and dives, but with his lengthy if ugly staff, he always positioned it in just a way to force the light mech to abort his attack lest he impale himself onto the butt end of the staff. Damn, it's the weapons that decided this match even before it started. VES commented, appreciative of Leviticus and his skillful use of his staff. That light mech is not fast enough to go around the staff. The light mech eventually decided to risk it all, and dove in deeper. The staff loomed before the lighter mech, but its pilot clearly went in with a sacrifice in mind. It introduced a sideways motion in its approach, attempting to let the staff fall onto its left side. However, Leviticus somehow exploded in speed for just a fraction of a second. The staff managed to correct its path just in time for the light mech to get its power reactor squarely in the way of the weapon. An enormous crunch sounded out as the light mech stopped in its track. The knives dropped as the staff end burst from its upper waist. The entire crowd went wild as they cheered for Leviticus. Some of them even screamed for blood. Unfortunately for the thrill seekers, this particular light mech model hosted its cockpit in the lower waist. Only its power core got run through by the staff. If it was a cockpit, then it would have been a certain fatality. The arena's weak safety measures could never have stopped it in time. VES was pretty sure Leviticus had blood on his hands. Any seasoned gladiator couldn't avoid such occurrences, as it was simply too dangerous for them to hold back. Leviticus slowed down his reaction speed now that the battle was over. With excruciating slowness, he pulled his mech staff from the corpse of the other mech and let it fall to the ground. No one seemed to care such an action could have aggravated any injuries the opposite pilot suffered. So what do you think about my man Levi? He's impressive. He manages to make the most out of his mech with minimal movements. He's the perfect heavy mech pilot. Carlos nodded in agreement. He's mentioned in his interviews that he's saving up his prize money for a good one. It will take a while, though. The amateur ring doesn't give out much rewards. It takes a lot of money to keep his current mech afloat. A comm rung out. VES lifted his wrist and saw that Vincent Ricklin was on the line. It was time for him to go back to work. I gotta go. My client is calling. Sure. It was fun. I'll be staying here for a few more hours. Go ahead without me. All right, see you later. VES picked up the call, hoping Vincent came with good news. Chapter 63, Nether Regions. My man VES, I received your files. I can't say I'm entirely satisfied with your work. The cape doesn't have any frills and the surface lighting schemes don't seem impressive at all. The only thing I found cool is the red lights installed underneath the armor. VES was afraid of that. Not satisfying his client meant his rewards for the mission could be reduced. I have made my design choices with resilience in mind. Excessive frills will be the first thing that gets lost when your mech receives damage. It's better to keep a clean appearance that looks great both when it's pristine and when it has survived a battle. The excuse was enough to cause Vincent to pause in his tirade. He frowned and thought over his words. All right, but I'm consulting a pro shuttle customizer artist for the lighting scheme. I still feel your designs are too basic. Hey, why didn't I do that in the first place? You're not an artist. If you are unsatisfied with my designs, feel free to turn to someone else. Though the system wouldn't like it, VES agreed with Vincent's choice. Just make sure the artist knows that mechs are machines that are meant to be put in the front lines. Yeah, whatever you say. As for getting permission and sourcing the materials, I'll let my assistant handle the details. That would be appreciated. Though he could purchase the extra materials himself, he'd be liable to get ripped off in the process. In any case, I'm still in the conceptual stage of working out a design to meet your third demand. I'm expecting to see your proposal by tomorrow. I need you to work on my new mech as fast as possible, within 2 weeks at least. That knocked VES off course. This was the first time he heard about any deadline. Is it very urgent that I deliver your mech in that time? Yes, it's super urgent. I've already got a bet going on. I'm going to show that bastard that I'm not scared or anything. I'm not a coward. Yes, yes, you're very brave. VES said quickly, trying to avoid getting on the receiving end of a tirade. Vincent, I'll get it done today and have a potential design for you to peruse by tomorrow. You'd better. The signal cut off abruptly, causing VES to sigh with relief. He had been a little negligent in his duties. He thought he had plenty of time to consider all of his options and refine Vincent's dream mech step by step. The sudden hard deadline of 2 weeks put a sudden stop to his leisurely vacation on Bentheim. He took Lucky with him and left the arena and its cheering fans behind. He hailed an aircar straight back to the MTA. After going through several security scans, he finally ended up at a design studio similar to the last one. He was ready to get back to work. A bulge, huh? VES considered as he summoned the image of his mech, now with a cape and some rudimentary light system. In his eyes, the mech already looked pretty masculine, in a knight in shiny armor kind of way. Adding an obvious bulge to the front waist would ruin the entire feel of the mech. Men who wore armor in those days never exposed their private parts to any danger. It's one of the most vulnerable weak points in a human body. Mechs were pretty much the same way. Its central position just on top of the mechanically hungry legs made it a prime position to place the engines. As such, the waist and lower torso portion of a mech possessed plenty of armor already. It would be highly challenging to elongate the front section without impacting a mech's maneuverability in some strange fashion. Unless he stuck something on it at a right angle. But then he'd ruin his reputation and get Vincent arrested for indecency. I shouldn't be the only person who is dealing with this problem. The mech is an imitation of the human form. Yet mech designers were content to wholly minimize any waist protrusions as much as possible in the name of efficiency. Perhaps Vincent had a point where he said that the lack of gender expression in a mech presented an obstacle to fully bonding with it in the process. If VES simply put something subtle there, it might even improve the mech's X factor. But what if the pilot is of another gender? VES could imagine a dissonance between the mech and the pilot should occur, but not too strong. Plenty of female and other gendered pilots pulled off fantastic performances in very masculine mechs. And while they are less common, his own feminine-looking Fantasia variant also showed that no male pilots ever performed much worse than the female pilots. Still, he couldn't help but feel that gender did matter. Maybe this was the Great Wall that held him back from scoring higher than an E in terms of X factor. The instance that he earned a C rating from the system must have been attributed to other factors. It might even be higher if VES paid attention to his mech's gender in the first place. Is this the secret to obtaining a higher X factor? VES asked himself, and with the knowledge he mastered so far, he guessed that it might very well be a viable direction to pursue. He then recalled some strange skills and sub-skills in the system's skill tree. They mostly pertain to replacing a mechanical mech's parts with biological equivalents. So instead of using artificial muscles made out of alloys and polymers, these researchers cultured living muscle tissue with the same shape and function. A mech is an imitation of the human body. There are some people out in the galaxy who believe in the phrase a bit more literal than others. VES imagined he touched upon one of the great secrets of what humanity's elite are pursuing. He realized the mech designer system's unintentional reveal of what other researchers are pursuing in their dark and hidden laboratories were dangerous secrets. This was so far above his level that if he ever revealed any of his suspicions, that he might draw an entire battle fleet from some first-rate superstate upon his head. I better keep all of these thoughts locked up for the moment. He quickly concluded, and turned his attention back to the matter of portraying a certain piece of male anatomy. He referenced the galactic net again and took a look at how ancient pre-space flight civilizations dealt with the matter of armoring the crotch. A lot of ridicule-inducing images appeared. Some ancient armorers literally shaped a form-fitting codpiece that looked like they could snugly fit the member. In today's age, if VES implemented such a thing onto his mech, he'd literally get hounded from his profession. The slightly larger and subtler codpieces were not much better. They still bulged out so obviously that they never failed to call an observer's gaze to the person's waist. Sure, they offered a lot of protection, but the way they drew the eye just caused them to look like flaunting peacocks. Then again, it's not like Vincent is any different. Still, VES sought a more decent example. He found a couple of interesting images. Some armor designers neatly avoided this issue by adding a chainmail or plated skirt. While that would work brilliantly with certain mechs, he was sure to draw Vincent's ire. A man never wore skirts, after all, and his client wanted to flaunt his masculinity, not negate it entirely. He eventually spotted some codpieces that looked a bit more fitting for modern times. These codpieces skewed rounded shapes and instead used sharp angles in a combination of triangular and rectangular forms. These examples evoke the suggestion that they were there to do their job of protecting the crotch without attracting undue attention. It looked sharp, modern, and most importantly did not cross the line into indecency. VES liked the concept very much that he immediately turned on the design studio's designer program and put his inspirations into form. He hit some snags along the way. The Mark Antony was a frame based on the heavily armored Caesar Augustus. Both mechs weighed at the top end of the medium weight class. As the legs and the waist were some of the most heavily armored portions of any mechs, this meant that it was highly unusual to add additional layers on top. VES had to consider the range of motion of the legs. Extreme contortions could very well bump into the mech and crush any rigid obstacle in its way. He doubted Vincent wanted everyone to see him destroy his facsimile manhood while inside the cockpit. Shaping the codpiece in a triangular shape so that its bottom portion was minimized could only go so far. If I can't avoid any collisions, then it needs to have some give. He thought back to yesterday and recalled his conversation with Vincent. He casually mentioned using a sponge-like material to build this part with. Such a method could allow VES to avoid the problem of leaving his mech open to destroying its own gender. He took an hour to design this simple part. He first took a resilient sponge-like composite from the market and shaped it in a roughly triangular form that protruded sufficiently from the lower waist. He undersized it in order to leave enough room for armored plates to cover up the soft and flexible composite. He didn't want to resort to a different material, so he chose to stick to the same HRF armor plating. After stepping back, he took in the entire projection of the mech. The Mark Antony still looked awe-inspiring and ready to fight. The triangular armored codpiece nonetheless attracted a substantial amount of attention, but its design was sufficiently different from the more obscene examples in history. It looked tasteful, even if VES would never admit it. Still, he hoped Vincent accepted this addition. His Mark Antony variant somehow looked more complete with the codpiece. Well, VES personally preferred it to be smaller and less attention-grabbing. Nevertheless, now that he considered the question whether it made any difference if mechs had genders, it looked more fitting. When VES contacted Vincent in the morning, he showed the groggy-looking Scion the projection of his work. Even Vincent adopted a stumped expression. His jaw practically dropped as he admired the augmented form. "It's great. That's exactly what I was going for. It's a bit classier than I prefer, but absolutely nobody will ridicule me for hiding my package any longer." VES questioned who exactly lacked the sense to criticize a mech's exclusion of unnecessary additions. Still, he kept his mouth shut, not willing to disparage any powerful heirs and step on Vincent's toes at the same time. After ranting about the genius of the codpiece for several minutes, Vincent finally gave VES the green light. "I want you to go back to whatever dirtball you're based in and produce my mech according to this design. Make sure you coordinate with my assistant if you need anything extra. Don't call me back until you finish the mech." His personal assistant took over the line. VES asked a bit about the progress of procuring the materials for the cape, the lighting system and also the codpiece, and got a reassuring answer. "Our logistical department has fast-tracked deliveries to your workshop in Cloudy Curtain. They will arrive long before your flight back to your home planet." VES then referred the personal assistant contact his broker to sign a contract for a commission. Marcella was much more capable of handling the sales portion of the negotiation. Once he received his advance payment, he could ship all the other materials he needed to his workshop. As VES packed up his meager luggage and brought his cat back to the spaceport, he wondered how he should actually build his mech. Vincent's product had to be in his hands in around 13 days, which sounded a lot, but certification and shipping took a lot of time and so did acclimatization. He couldn't expect Vincent to master his new mech in a day. The first time he fabricated the Mark Antony, he took over a week, and that was when he worked with maximum care. Now that he grew a little more familiar with the fabrication process, he could skip most of the excessive caution and work a little more briskly. Ideally, the fabrication shouldn't take longer than a week including the additional parts. Any longer and it calls into question why I even bother fabricating the mech personally in the first place. He could definitely imagine hiring a full-time fabricator to take care of his production, but now was not the time. He mentally apologized to Carlos for putting his job offer aside. Once he received more demand for his product, he could revisit this issue. Chapter 64, Second Mech. By the time VES exited the transit shuttle, he breathed in the fresh and moist air of his home planet. Bentheim might have been a melting pot of trade and business, but it did not fare well hosting so many people in such a small planet. He led Lucky and his floating luggage carrier onto a nearby aircar and headed back to his home. His workshop already received its first deliveries of materials by the time he returned. The rest of the raw materials he needed to build a modified Mark Antony trickled in throughout the day. The new security system installed by SAS did their work and performed thorough scans of the arriving delivery shuttles and the containers they carried. VES already summoned up the design in his systems designer program and optimized his first commercial design. He had advanced his skills a little bit since he first completed this design, so VES took advantage of it to marginally increase his mech speed and armor specifications. It's only been a few weeks, but I've already advanced this much with my upgraded skills. The speed of his progress astounded him. Only true elites nurtured by more advanced states could improve this fast. With 3000 DP on the line, VES treated this fabrication task with utmost importance. He could not fail his second production. Not only would it screw up the mission, it could also leave a bad track record on his thin record. A 50% chance of failing a delivery was not a good way to build his reputation. As his optimizations to the design was complete, VES began the tedious task of starting his fabrication. First, he unpacked his raw materials and sorted them out. He checked each lot for their integrity and completeness. Fortunately, despite having bought these materials as surplus from the open market, they had all been delivered as promised. The MTA took a dim view on such manipulations, so they guaranteed all the trades happening under their watch. With such a formidable backing to rely on, VES had high expectations for the deliveries he paid good money for. He spent up to 18 million credits to get them to his workshop. Everything is prepared. Now all I need is to get in the right mood. His modified variant was still expected to fulfill the same role. However, its changed appearance demanded a slightly different set of priorities. VES had to add the goal of looking good to his list of things to focus on when building the mech. I know the design looks great. All I have to do now is to convert that virtual projection into a very real entity. While he set a firm deadline of 7 days, VES did not rush his fabrication. He tediously drew out the most important task, which was fabricating all of the Mark Antony's parts without any errors. His familiarity with the process along with the consolidation of his fabrication skills allowed him to produce most parts without any issue. The HRF armor plating took the most time to come into being, though once he knew all the knacks, VES encountered no risks in its formation. It had been designed with crude mass production in mind, as the armor was supposed to be a cheap and highly processed armor variant. To VES, this was both an advantage and a disadvantage. The best part was that now that he knew how to form the trickier shapes, even brain-dead VES could manage to produce a decent batch. However, Marlin Solutions, who originally developed this formula, had steered it towards making it as foolproof as possible, meaning that a lot of tedious steps in between had to be followed before the armor came into being. In essence, its production still took a whopping 2 days out of his schedule. The mace and shield were relatively simple designs, yet their large mass and volume meant that it took a pretty long time for his aged 3D printer to produce all of their bulk. As it took 2.5 days of fairly brisk production before he fabricated the rest of the components, VES only had 3 days left for assembly. Luckily, the process of assembling a mech from its component parts was not a delicate process. Doing it right the first time laid a solid foundation for subsequent assembling runs, and as VES only made minor changes to the design, he encountered very little issues. The only real problem he faced at this stage was that he always had too little room for cabling and other delicate components. The Mark Antony partially inherited the crowded interior from its base model, and VES could not do much about it even as he already made some attempts at alleviating the issue. This portion is the riskiest step of the fabrication cycle. I can't rush it at all. If I stuff in the cables with too much force, I'm liable to break something. Thus, out of his expectation, VES eventually completed the basic frame of the mech after 7.5 days. While the mech looked awfully complete, VES still had to add in Vincent's bling. Luckily, all of the extras were nothing complicated. The lighting system was the most complicated system to install. VES had not sealed his unfinished mech tight but left several holes in its plating. He could easily stuff in the internal lighting and emplace the wireless power transmitters in whatever nook and cranny that could fit such a small part. The exterior lighting posed less of a problem for him. These thin, flat pieces had already been fabricated by a skillful artist Vincent selected. VES had to admit the sharp, angled design was leagues ahead of his own pathetic attempts. The artist even managed to form them in a way that complemented the codpiece. It reinforced the masculinity of the mech. After finishing the placement of the lights and attaching the crimson cape, VES was left with the final piece. The codpiece lay on the ground, ready to be emplaced on his almost finished mech. He hesitated for a moment. This is a bit embarrassing. Looking at it, it feels like I'm transplanting someone else's private part. Still, in order to cap off his second ever fabrication, he had to complete this step. With a sigh, he ordered a robotic arm to grab hold of the codpiece and lift it up. The triangular decoration was not made out of exceptional materials, so the arm had no trouble lifting it up. When VES made sure the alignment fit the design specifications, he pressed the final button and let the arm firmly attach the codpiece to its rightful place. VES let out a deep breath. The mech was almost completely done. He let his scanner bot scour the mech for any hidden faults while he stepped on a hoverbot and lifted himself up to the cockpit. He did not forget to finish the last step. He entered the cockpit and examined the small hole where VES was about to place his next gem. What shall I choose? Though VES had gathered a small collection of gems, none of them were noteworthy. Lucky still hadn't crapped out the exotic alloy he gulped out of the anonymous box that someone delivered to his address a while ago. VES hoped that his gem cat would finish digesting the extraordinary materials and perhaps use it for this mech, but apparently he was too optimistic. He opened the pouch, he placed all of the gems he picked up so far and randomly sought out the most sparkling piece. It turned out to be an exceptionally sparkling zircon gemstone. Zircon of minor resonance. Increases the tonal quality of a mech's weapon by 20% when installed. At first sight, VES thought he hit jackpot. After gathering so many gems that only boosted an attribute by 1% or less, he suddenly dug out a gem that improved something by as much as a fifth. Then he read the description closer and got disappointed. Tonal quality. Are you kidding? What the gem basically did was make a mech's weapon impact sound more pleasing. Ask any mech pilot or designer if they cared how they sounded like. Pretty much none of them ever cared about it. VES found the gem to be utterly useless other than looking pretty. Frankly, he was glad to get rid of it. Its appearance matched Vincent's vanity. After installing the gem in its slot, VES stroked the console of the mech for a moment. Sometimes, he still dreamed of piloting a mech. Then he looked at the darkened cockpit and thought to himself that he built every part of it by himself. Naturally, he used a lot of machines to get it done, but in these days that practically meant handmade. I'm going to miss you. VES left the cockpit of the mech and let the hoverbot take him down. Pride swelled within him as he satisfyingly contacted the MTA. He officially finished fabricating his second mech. Now he just had to certify the mech and let Marcella ship it back to Bentheim on a priority cargo shuttle. He opted to let the MTA's personnel pick up the finished mech without him this time. VES doubted that Gertrude, the technician in charge, appreciated his presence. She's going to be pissed again when I interrupt her schedule with another certification process. Still, VES hoped his nascent contacts in the MTA could keep the curmudgeonly woman in check. With decent people such as Ryan Baldwin and Justin Chandler in charge of the Cloudy Curtain branch, VES had no reason to doubt its integrity. By the way, that kind of begs the question why they are stationed in this backwater of a planet in the first place. They're way too good for their current posts. Could it be that VES was too short-sighted? While the MTA didn't lack talents, he still felt as if Baldwin and Chandler's talents were wasted here. Hardly anything exciting went on in this quiet neighborhood. Perhaps they chose to be stationed here expressly for that reason. Or perhaps they were exiled. VES shook his head and stopped cracking his head over this issue. As a large, powerful organization that spanned the galaxy, the MTA's palace intrigue made everything that took place in the halls of Rittersburg look like child's play. An outsider like him had no business speculating about what happened deep inside the MTA. While he waited for the certification to finish, VES called Marcella. The hefty woman's face popped up from his wrist projector with a tired expression. Do you know how late it is back here in Durham? Ah, sorry. I forgot to check the local time. No worries, I was about to wake up soon anyway. I take it you've completed your second mech. Yup, and it looks pretty good. The mech came off my assembler without a hitch, even with the extra parts. I've seen the designs. You didn't disappoint. I'll take care of the shipping and delivery on my end. You just make sure to get ready for your next job. You've already got another order lined up for me. Marcella shook his head. The deal is still in its early stages. I won't expect any progress on that end for a week. All I can tell you that it's an order for multiple mechs, up to 5 at most possibly. That was a very surprising piece of news. VES still expected to meet single mech orders. Having someone buy 5 complete mechs was a very serious commitment to a newly introduced design. He calculated the sums quickly and figured out that the client could drop as much as 140 million credits in one go. That was a massive amount of money, and even if he left out most of that sum to cover his expenses and Marcella's commission, that still left him with 40 million credits of gross profits. 40 million credits. VES already drooled about what he could do with such a sum. He could proactively produce and start to stockpile his mechs in advance. No longer did he have to wait for advance payments to start procuring the raw materials. With the need for an advance payment gone, his mech would be much more attractive for prospective customers to buy. Marcella could also show off the real mech instead of rely on spec sheets and projections. Don't celebrate too early, VES. Not anyone is willing to spend so much on a last-gen advanced mech. Now that he thought about it, the money looked too good to be true. Spending a large amount of money in one go for a new design from a novice mech designer was crazy. Either the buyer was swimming in credits, or he added some extra demands. What's the catch, then? The buyer is an intermediary for another party. They want to conduct the trade without involving the MTA. That sounded like trouble. The two pieces of information were not too remarkable if they came alone, but combined and it practically screamed dirty dealings. Marcella should have known this from the start and reject the offer out of hand. While I might be a new designer, but I'm not desperate to the point of selling my mechs to pirates. Now hold on for a sec, VES. Marcella held out her hand. It's actually not a pirate we're selling our mechs to. The intermediary is a familiar face around Bentheim. He's serving as an agent for some of the shadier mercenary corps, but he has a good reputation insofar that he doesn't deal with gangs with active bounties on their heads. That abetted his indignation. Instead of selling his mechs to thieves, rapists, and murderers, he did business with regional powerhouses like Walter's Whalers. Was that still okay? Perhaps not, but the air of legitimacy these groups often sported made it less objectionable for VES to produce his mechs for them. Though VES still had a question. If these groups aren't so bad, why don't they approach you directly? Intermediaries still serve their purposes. I have been talking to the representative on and off for the last week or so and he still hasn't leaked any details about his clients. The only thing you can do is to take a leap of faith. VES imagined standing atop a tall skyscraper while spreading out his arms. He ran across the roof and jumped off the lip of the roof. Would he be able to land safely, or go all splat at the end of his fall? He resorted to his usual tactic when faced with a difficult issue. Let me think about it. Since the deal is nowhere near being closed, let me consider it for a while longer. Just make sure they aren't doing anything too shady. I do not want to get into trouble with the authorities. Me too. I can assure you that I do not relish in attracting the attention of the Mech Corps. I'll be sure to vet their conditions in detail. After talking about a few other minor issues, VES hung up the call. Now all he needed to do was wait for his mech to be delivered to the Ricklin boy. He wondered whether his mech would see battle soon. VES was quite worried at Vincent's potential performance. Someone who thought it was more important to look cool than to pilot the most effective mech was not a normal pilot. Who knew how diligently he learned how to fight with a mech. Part 7 of the series ends here. Thank you for watching and listening. If you find it interesting, please give us a like, a comment and a subscription so that we have the motivation to make the next videos.